And thank you for watching KTN News. Welcome back to Planet Action as we continue having this discussion on matters to do with water security. And before we went on the break, Mr. John Nyagwencha was having a conversation on what needs to be done, how this technology can get to communities. John, you were talking about the importance of this technology and how different technologies are suitable for different solutions and tackling different problems. Where are we?
All right. So I think, like I said, first, there is a lot of solutions that exist. The challenge is how do we get the solutions in the hands of the people that need them? And social enterprise is, I think, perhaps the best vehicle of taking these solutions that are very effective and have been tested to putting them in people's hands. But for that to happen successfully, of course, we have to make sure that these social enterprises are being nurtured, that we have businesses coming up. There is a supportive, framework around how these businesses are set up. I talked about even taxation that can be very high for solutions that are really meant to help people. And these businesses are not set up to make a lot of profit. So how do we get that support for these businesses to be more effective in reaching the communities that need to be reached? The partnerships I talked about with government agencies, be it the ministries like the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Water, how do we leverage these partnerships? How do we leverage partnerships with counties to make sure that we can access the communities that we need? But looking at also the financial institutions that need to support communities to access these solutions. Because the reality is, as much as we, in the case of Aqua Clara Kenya, have designed our water filter, which is a solution for making water safe, with a very intentional approach to make it affordable, the reality is that not everybody within the country can afford it. And so we still need to look at some of the financing options that exist, whether it's financial institutions, banks and microfinance, or SACCOs, the savings and credit cooperatives, or sometimes even technology. There's mobile technology, fintech, that can come in also to help us be able to advance these solutions to people who need them and collect this money over a period of time.
And John, if I just pull up some few stats from what it is you guys deal with now here, is you deal with families and schools in rural East Africa that depend on contaminated water. That is where you come in, making sure that the water is clean, and that you've also you are designing a distribution of water, sanitation and hygiene solutions across Africa, and so far targeted around 300,000 people. Now, with all this information that does exist, what is the missing link? What is the biggest problem that needs to be addressed immediately?
Okay, that's a great question. I would say the biggest challenge, other than the awareness that I talked about, which needs to continue happening, is really affordability, because the solutions do exist. But unfortunately, the people that are affected the most tend to be those who have the least income. And so that's the disparity we have to deal with. For people who have a bit more income, they are able to access solutions. You can see even in Nairobi, we have proliferation of water refill, water bottling, because there's more income that is available to buy water. But for rural communities, it is a big challenge. So for example, the water filter that we sell as Aqua Clara Kenya costs only 3,700. And this is a water filter that can last for a period of 5 years. But even this is not accessible to a good number of the people that we are targeting. And so financing options, like I talked about, happy to talk about one of the other innovative ways we've been able to support communities. I think you talked about carbon credits. I'm happy to segue into that as well. Because I think when we started this show, we talked about climate changes. And the reality that we are facing today across the country is that there is more water scarcity. Water quality is diminishing. That also can be tied to climate change. And unfortunately, the people that are suffering the most are the ones that are least responsible for causing climate change.
And on that conversation now, there is all these conversations around climate. There is the Africa Climate Summit that took place in September last year, We had the COP28 that happened in Dubai.
Yeah.
And all these, we have the UNEA6 that happened earlier this year in Nairobi. And all these conversations trying to find a solution. And one of the biggest conversations around the solutions being given out is carbon credits.
Yeah.
And carbon credits, even as we have this discussion, people don't tend to understand it. Now, it is even worse in rural communities who don't have access to technology or this information. Now, as Aqua Clara and your approach and your reach to these rural communities, how are you taking advantage of carbon credits to be able to fund initiatives towards water security?
Yeah. So perhaps I think it would be good to start at a very foundational level about what carbon credits are. So first of all, with the reality of climate change, I think there's been a lot of effort to address climate change, to mitigate climate change, but also to help communities adapt to the effects of climate change. And in 2012, I believe it was, in Kyoto, there was a protocol that was developed. And the premise of that protocol was, can we have set limits of how much emissions we are going to allow, and then there is going to be a penalty for those that are going to go above those limits. So what ended up happening is a market then emerged from that, where companies, but even countries that are emitting above a certain standard, either a standard that has been set as part of a regulatory framework, or voluntarily, because there are also companies now that are responsible, that want to act responsibly, that voluntarily set targets and say, we are not going to emit beyond this. But if we do, we are going to then offset the emissions that we've exceeded by. So what that means is that if we've exceeded by 1,000 tons, we are going to find a project that is able to reduce carbon dioxide emission by 1,000 and fund it. And that would be then a way to achieve that equilibrium. And so for us specifically, the work we do as Aqua Clara Kenya with rural communities is mostly transitioning people from boiling water, using charcoal or firewood, to using a water filter, which does not use any electricity, does not use any fuel, does not emit any carbon dioxide or any other greenhouse gas. And so we are able to quantify how much carbon dioxide is avoided when a household, a family, or a school is transitioned from boiling water, 1 liter, to filtering 1 liter of water. And so for us, I think as early as 2011, we saw this as a great opportunity and started looking at how do we make our product affordable to the people that we are targeting. We're working with circles and microfinance, and that's not going as fast as it needs to get. We can't charge these communities as much as it costs, because then they can't afford it. And so carbon credits became immediately a very interesting opportunity. And we were able to work with our partners, Climate Impact, shout out to them, to really develop a project in Kenya, I think one of the first in the world around water, that enables communities that are affected by climate change to be beneficiaries by acquiring water filters at a subsidized cost, thanks to carbon credits.
And so the carbon credits for a very long time has been seen as we need to plant trees, we need to have vegetation and all this. But you are looking at it from a different perspective. It is from a perspective that if we stop the people that you're targeting from emitting carbon dioxide by using this technology, we are able to quantify, say, every household and be able to sell that. How is that working? And is this an idea that you've sold to the government in terms of this is also another solution in attaining carbon credits in the country? Because as we speak right now, carbon credits, according to many people out there, is we need to plant trees, we need to plant vegetation.
And trees are still important, and so are still part of it.
Yes. In the meantime, we can equally take your route and still start cashing in as early as now.
Exactly. And it's a very cyclical thing. So even for us, when we are transitioning people from boiling water to using our filters, we are actually also avoiding cutting of trees, because typically they'll need to cut down trees to have firewood or charcoal.
Yes.
But I think it's more than now planting trees, because trees, as important as they are, and they continue to be incredibly important as carbon sinks, there are other ways that we are causing climate change. So boiling water, for example, as I mentioned, is one. I think we've seen in this country as well, there's been a transition to more renewable energy. People using solars. In the past, I think there was things like lanterns that used kerosene or generators. I think you're seeing now there's more transition towards using cleaner energy, even for cooking. So it's good to think about all the different ways that we can avoid climate change. And therein, there are opportunities then for enterprises that are looking at addressing the challenge of safe water, the challenge of climate change, to tap into markets like the carbon credits market. And for us to say, I think it's been a very important revenue stream that has enabled us to go the extent that you've talked about, 300,000 people that we've covered, and we're just getting started. The idea is to have 1.5 million people with safe water directly through our business by 2027. And so to reach that 1.5 million, carbon credits is a very essential tool. And we are seeing now, I think since last year, the government really waking up to this reality of carbon credits and trying to see how they will position themselves. I think what would be beneficial from the government, rather than just looking at it, of course, as a cash cow or a revenue stream for the government, is to see how do we use this as an instrument to help communities that are going to be hardest hit to really mitigate and adapt to the adverse effects of climate change, as opposed to putting a very big penalty on companies that are going to get revenue from carbon credits, and that then ends up making it even more difficult to provide solutions like the ones we are doing today.
And when we talk about all these solutions that we need towards climate change, food security, water security, transition to green energy, there is the aspect of collaboration, because the government cannot do it on its own. Kenyans ourselves, we cannot do it. We need government assistance in terms of tax incentives and all this. CBOs, CSOs, entrepreneurs like you need government goodwill in all these conversations. Does that goodwill exist, or is it just on paper?
Well, I say there's room for improvement. There's a lot of room for improvement. I think there's work for us to do in the private sector to really also bring government to understand and appreciate the role that we are playing. And I know there's a lot of attempts, even on the climate issue. There's a lobby group that is working on this to engage government formally. So it's to say there is room for improvement, there's work for us to do, there is work for government obviously to do, and to start looking at private sector as a solution or part of the solution. It's not going to be done by government alone, and start looking at how do we incentivize businesses, how do we support businesses, how do we create a conducive environment for businesses to thrive. If it's an issue of carbon credits, how do we ensure that local businesses are getting carbon credits, and then the government makes sure that these local businesses are then leveraging and utilizing this revenue to support communities. So that it's not that these credits are generated and then extracted, and the communities that we are meant to serve continue to struggle. So I think the next phase really needs to see a lot of collaboration between government, private sector, to not only educate, like I said, create awareness, but also to disseminate and distribute these technologies and make sure that they are accessible.
And finally, I wanted to talk about this water situation that we have now. Here's a question where we just came from the worst drought in over 4 decades. Then we got into El Nino. We saw different counties flooded. Nairobi was not spared. But all this water just disappeared all the way to the ocean. Therefore, moving forward, how should county governments, national governments, private sector, and Kenyans themselves come together in making sure that this water does not go to waste, that we get to store this water? Therefore, we need to talk about storage, we need to talk about filtration, we need to talk about cleaning this water, distributing this water to people who need it. Therefore, in terms of the conversations around water security, How should we address it as stakeholders in unison together?
I think there are two levels I can think about. So there's the macro level, and the government has, like I said, set very good precedents in other sectors in really investing heavily. Like I said, the road network in this country is not what it was 15 years ago. Electricity. Water, for some reason, I don't know whether it's because it's not, water and sanitation is not as shiny and as perhaps other sectors may be, but it is very critical.
But it's always in a manifesto. We're going to
It is
build dams.
It is. It is actually even in the Constitution as a mandate to county governments. But I think it's about time we put our money where our mouth is, and start taking real steps. It's not rocket science. We're talking about building dams where dams need to be built. And we have reservoirs then that can store as much water as we are getting. You know, if you think about countries that are, some of them supplying us food that are deserts, that don't have the water resources that we have, I think it's inexcusable for us to move, as you said, from water surplus to a place where we have water scarcity right after. So at the macro level, I think a lot of investment has to happen. And we've seen that it can be done, as it's been done in other sectors. The policy framework also needs to be created, incentives around, for example, rainwater harvesting. Some years ago, I think there was a policy from I think National Housing around every apartment or every house that is being built to have solar water heaters. We need to see something like that to incentivize or to, by policy, require that anybody building a house needs to include rainwater harvesting, so that we are not also putting strain on very limited resources, whether it's tap water, a lot of drilling of groundwater, which is long-term not going to be very good for our stability, and that water is going to be depleted as well. So there's a lot that needs to happen at the policy level. But then, more importantly for me as an entrepreneur, I think there is real business opportunity for enterprises like Aquaclara Kenya and others to look at this challenge as an opportunity that can, of course, generate business, create employment, while tackling this challenge. And for that to happen, like I said, we need to then see that the government is really supportive, and that may include the tax instruments that need to come into play, but also breaking other barriers, whether those barriers are awareness, whether those barriers are financing options, then financial institutions can come into play there. But the next decade, the decade we're going into, I think these collaborations really need to kick in. But I do think that we are moving, albeit very slowly, we are moving in the right direction. We just now need to really accelerate it. I think the challenge we tend to have as a culture is we wait until it's very, you know, the problem is right on our face.
Yes.
Yeah, until we're being choked. So very last minute to get it done. But I think this is not a problem we can afford to wait that long. I think we need to start taking those steps now. It's only going to get worse. But we do have the tools within our reach. We do have the solutions. It's just a matter of really getting down to it and making sure it happens. Yeah.
That is John Nyagwencha, CEO Aquaclara, talks about the importance of having water that is not only just, let's not just talk about water security, but let's have a conversation around safe water in terms of the government coming, pulling its weight, the private sector, the media ourselves, and even you at home, making sure that you play your part in making sure that the water that you have is good for you. Because at the end of the day, we keep treating people because of the water they consume. It is one of the main reasons why our hospitals are full today. But what it is that we need to do, we just need to make sure that we are water secure, but you also have water that is good for us. Because remember, water has correlation to food security, to health, and even in terms of construction. We know the country is big on development right now, and we all need water for all this. Therefore, what is it that we must do? The government must pull its weight from the macro level, as John says, from the micro level. You and I, we equally must play our part in making sure that we are water secure. This conversation definitely must continue, and even now with the changing weather patterns, it is super hot. The Met Department has warned that Kenya will be hot in the next few weeks. Our neighbors, South Sudan, like I had alluded to earlier, are equally going through a tough period. 40 degrees Celsius. Schools have been suspended. Children are not going to school because of the weather conditions. What will we learn from that in the coming COP29 that will be going to Azerbaijan, and also the Africa Climate Summit, the second edition? What are we going to be talking about in terms of having water security that is both healthy and water that is sustainable to all of us? My name is Dennis Aseto. This is Planet Action. Eric Latif will be coming at the top of the hour with the Newsline. Enjoy the rest of your viewing and good evening.